Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and in this episode, we're going to finally look at Johnnie Jacobs. Johnnie is the fisherman who was at the Lumber River the day that Mica Francis died, and the one who found her belongings on the riverbank. I hope his fishing is better than his storytelling, because his storytelling is erratic at best. I've put off making this video because I had a feeling it was going to be about as fun as squeezing lemons directly into my eyeballs, and I was right. I'm not sure I'll be able to do justice to this aspect of the Mica Francis case, but I'm going to try. Before I start the video, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your support through this copyright claim fiasco. I filed counterclaims and am waiting for the outcome. I will be keeping my memberships through Patreon, though, because it's a much better platform for it. I have been overwhelmed by the outpouring of love from all of you. Thank you. Now on with our video. I have sat for hours listening to and reading the varying accounts that Johnnie Jacobs has given about the day of Mica's death. In this video, I am not accusing him of anything more than giving different accounts of the events of that day. I'll present what he said, and you can decide what role he played. The interviews I listened to were conducted by Daniel, the PI that worked with Kyler, not Tyler, True Crime with Natasha, Veronica, a joke star, and Rich McHugh from News Nation. I'll post links to the interviews in the description. In light of the recent copyright claims, I have not included any clips of the interviews, but have tried to make sure I say which interview has the information I'm talking about. On Saturday, April 27, 2024, Johnnie Jacobs decided to go fishing on the Lumber River. He put his one-man boat, which he describes as a small canoe, in at the Princess Anne access. He has a small trolling motor on his small canoe, and that morning, between 10:30 and 11:30, Johnnie puttered up the river trying to catch whatever fish there are in the Lumber River. At some point in the day, he decided to go into an area that he calls the lake. The name of the lake area is Griffin Whirl, but we'll call it the lake too. So Johnnie turned around to go into the lake and passed a John boat with 3 people on it. Or it may be just 2 people. In an early interview, he said it was a couple. In other iterations, he swears he never said there were 2 people, and he's always said it was 3. So it was 2 men and a child, then 2 men and a young lady, and then somehow he had figured out that one of the men was the young lady's father, but then he wasn't sure which one of the men was her father. Then he had Maury Povich show up. Not really. He asked the 2 to 3 people in the boat if they were catching anything, and they told him no, that the river was too high. So he continued downstream and moseyed into the lake. I'm not sure if it's possible to actually mosey while in a boat, but in this narration, we're making it possible. Let's pause to talk about the river level that day. There have been varying accounts on how high or low the river was. Johnnie said the river was high, but here in a minute I'll show a comment from someone who disagreed. I decided to look at river levels on the U.S. Geological Survey site. On April 27, 2024, the river level was 4.56 feet at the Boardman Bridge gauge during the time Johnnie would have been fishing. The Princess Anne access is 9.4 river miles from Boardman. The water level at Fair Bluff, which is downriver another 11 miles, is about a foot higher than Boardman. So I would guess Princess Anne is somewhere in between. The median level of the Lumber River at Boardman is 6 feet. I'm not sure I'd classify 4.5 feet as the river being high, but I'm definitely not a Lumber River expert. So Johnnie, having recently moseyed, started fishing in the lake. He heard a faint crying and said he couldn't tell if it was an adult, a child, a man, or a woman. In the interview with Natasha, he said that if he could have seen who was crying, he would have gone and talked to them. But in the very next sentence, he said that you don't ever interfere with people there, especially not on the river. Quote, "If I would have been able to see what was going on, I would have intervened. I would have. When I heard her crying, if I could have put eyes on her, I would have went over there and asked her what was the matter. But you don't do stuff like that when you're in Robeson County or really anywhere on a river. You just don't intervene on stuff like that. I mind my own business." So he would have intervened if he could have seen the person, and if the person was somewhere other than the river or Robeson County, where you don't interfere with whatever might be happening. Johnnie said the crying lasted for 2 to 3 minutes, and then he heard a gunshot and the crying stopped. He stated he only heard 1 gunshot. There was another account where the same person who disagreed with Johnnie about the water levels also disagreed with him about the number of shots. She said she heard 2 shots. In a comment she made on Facebook, she wrote, quote, "No, on April 27th, the water was not high. You could stand about 15 feet from the bank to those flowers, and I know that for sure because I live about half a mile from river, and we also went down there, and me and my son was fishing at the boat ramp that day, and everyone heard the gunshots," end quote. When further questioned, she wrote that she heard 2 gunshots. So I guess the river was either high or not high, depending on who you asked. Or we can just go with it was 4.56 feet at the Boardman gauge. The number of shots also varied depending on who you ask. At some point, a kayaker showed up to fish in the lake. Johnnie has never said if the kayaker showed up before or after he did, but according to Johnnie, the kayaker ended up in the lake while he was there. Maybe he dropped from the sky. After Johnnie heard the gunshot, he turned around and saw the 2 to 3 people in the john boat coming into the lake. He asked them if they heard a gunshot, and they said yes. Johnnie then decided that even though it's not kosher to interfere when you hear someone crying, a gunshot is a whole different ballgame, and it's a game where you want your turn up to bat, or something like that. I'm not really a sports person, so my sport analogies stink. Yes, I could have just used a non-sport analogy, but I didn't, so here we are. Johnnie pulled into one of the many channels that come off the lake, and by golly, he just happened to pick the one where Mica's belongings were. How did he know which one to go to? I can't imagine it would be easy to pinpoint exactly where the crying was coming from, and even more difficult to pinpoint the gunshot. Sound carries across the water, and sometimes things that sound like they're right beside you are actually yards and yards away, and it's difficult to know exactly where the sound is coming from. So even though there are multiple channels off the lake, which you can see in this map, Johnnie chose the exact one where Mica's belongings were. It's downright uncanny. The channels off of the lake open into small, swampy sloughs, and when Johnnie made his way through that particular channel, he said he saw Mica's belongings about 2 feet off the shore. Johnnie's distance vision must be much better than his close-up vision, and we'll talk about his need for reading glasses later. So Johnnie found Mica's bag, which he originally described as a tote bag, and then later described it as a fanny pack with 3 different compartments. I don't know if Johnnie just doesn't know what a fanny pack is, because the camera shots of Mica that day showed her with a backpack. Maybe she had a fanny pack too. If so, what happened to her backpack? According to Johnnie, Mica's sunglasses and phone were on the ground beside her bag. He scooped them up, walked up a trail, looked a little to the left and then a little to the right, and didn't see anything. In one account, Johnnie said he peeked in the bag when he first found it, but in another, he didn't look in the bag at all. He then took her stuff and, quote, "put it in the front of my boat and got the hell up out of there because I was scared." He was so scared that he had gotten out of his boat and gone and looked around right before that. The PI asked Johnnie about those paths that he had walked up, and his reply was, quote, "when I found her belongings there was a path just as clear as day there. When you look out from the woods, you can see the lake. I feel like they saw me, 'cause there was other people in the lake. I think they seen us or seen me, to be honest with you." In a comment left on Facebook, Johnnie was talking about the same scenario and stated, "but I really feel she could see me," talking about Mica. But then later, it was they could see me. Who was the they that Johnnie thought was watching him? Did he actually see people in the woods? Why did he think there was more than one person? When Johnnie got back to the lake, the kayaker and the 2 to 3 people in the john boat were gone. He headed back towards the boat ramp, and when he passed the observation deck, he said there was a family of about 10 people there. And he told them he'd just found some stuff and he didn't know who it belonged to. The family allegedly told Johnnie that someone had called 911. I don't know if the entire family yelled it in unison or if it was actually just one person, but Johnnie said, "they told me." I wonder how they knew someone had called 911. Does that mean someone else called 911 after they heard the gunshot? Or were they talking about knowing that Mica had called 911? And the same woman who had commented that she was there and heard 2 gunshots also said that Johnnie had talked to a man and a woman standing on a pier about 500 feet away from where Mica was found. So was she talking about the observation deck? And was the family of 10 actually a family of 2? And why didn't Johnnie call 911? When he got back to the boat ramp, he put everything from his boat on the wall and loaded his boat onto his truck. That's when he says he looked inside Mica's bag. And through his various accounts, here is a list of what was in her bag. Cash, and it was over $500, I think. In the interview with Natasha, he said, quote, I know there was over $500. I'm not going to say there was more than 500, but I know there was five. I didn't count all of it. In an interview with Veronica, he said he counted it when he got in his truck. So besides the cash, there was Mica's driver's license, a bank card, a credit card, some type of little note, a Bible and prescriptions, some pads and keys. In an interview with Veronica, when asked about the note, Johnnie replied with, I didn't have my glasses. I couldn't read it no way. Some type of prescription or something like that. Here's my question. Johnnie knew Mica's name, and I presumed, as I'm sure everyone else did too, it was because he saw her driver's license. If he can't read a prescription without his glasses, how did he read the driver's license? I found a sample of South Carolina's driver's license on the South Carolina DMV site to check and see if they use abnormally large font, like maybe it was the size of the E on an eye chart, but it looks like normal size font. In his previous interviews, Johnnie has always said Mica's name is Mica Miller. But in this interview with Veronica, he said that since he didn't have his glasses on, he wasn't sure if it was Mecca or Mica. Well, that just means you didn't know how to pronounce her name, not that you couldn't read it, you doink. So Johnnie takes inventory of Mica's belongings and then takes it straight to law enforcement. Well, that was according to his first take on it. He later admitted that he left the park with all of Mica's belongings to go get a lighter. Johnnie told the PI that, quote, I ran to the store. I'm a smoker. I needed a lighter. I knew the law was already there, turned around and went straight back to that place. In the interview with Veronica, Johnnie said, quote, I left from there, seen the laws. The law was sitting over was just one. I thought there was just one deputy sheriff there at the time. I seen him over there. I said, whatever, I got to get me a light. Got to the store, came back. In the interview with Veronica, Johnnie said that he had a lighter, but he had used it up that day. He didn't have extra lighters in his truck, and he didn't ask 15 people on the way back to the boat ramp if anyone had a light. I'm not sure I believe the need a lighter story. On the way to or from the store, Johnnie said he called his buddy Charles, who he later learned was Charles McKinnon. In his interview with Natasha, Johnnie said he called Charles and told him he thought something bad had happened at the river. Quote, and he said, Little Jay, was there anybody in that slough there with you? And I said, yeah, there was another fellow there in a kayak. He said, ho, wait a minute, Little Jay. He said, was it a yellow kayak? I said, if I ain't mistaken, I believe it was. He said, was it a big white guy? I said, yep. He said, I know that fella. I know him. I know who you're talking about. I said, Charles, you got his phone number? He said, I do. I said, well, when I get through going where I feel like I got to get out of here, I said, I'm going to call you back and get the phone number from you so I can talk to the fella in the kayak. I have a question about that conversation. Is Charles clairvoyant? How would he know there was some big white guy in a yellow kayak in the lake with Johnnie? Later, Johnnie said he wasn't sure what time he talked to Charles because he deleted his call log. So he called Charles, and Charles told him it was at 1:27. Well, that can't be right. Unless it is right. Who knows at this point? Coincidentally, that was the timestamp as to when Mica was arriving at the gas station in Mullins. He also said the phone call had to have been around 4, but then in another interview, the time was 3 when he called Charles. I think we can all agree that Johnnie did not know when the phone call happened, if it happened. Which store did Johnnie go to? Daniel, the PI, first said that Johnnie had either gone to McClellan's Grocery or Floyd's. Later, Johnnie tells Veronica it was the Orrum General Store. So let's start with the Orrum General Store. It's 9 minutes away from the park. And he told Veronica he was only gone 10 minutes, so either Johnnie sped all the way there and back or he was gone longer. But before that, he had supposedly gone to Floyd's. Floyd's is 17 minutes away across the river and in a different county. Why on earth would he go so far for a lighter if he was jonesing for a cigarette? But the fact that McClellan's Grocery was mentioned at the beginning of the Fisherman's Tales is the most interesting to me, and here's why. I inadvertently found McClellan's Grocery one day when I was having a nose around the Robeson County Register of Deeds, seeing who owned property in that area. Charles McKinnon, the friend who Johnnie said he called that day Mica died, has a 2018 deed registered for a property on Tobacco Road. Guess what grocery store is on Tobacco Road and is only about 1 minute from the property that Charles owns? McClellan's Grocery, and it's about 11 minutes from the river. Here's a completely hypothetical situation which might explain some things. What if Johnny didn't go to the store for a lighter that day? What if he went to Charles's house and showed him Mica's bag? And what if Charles told him that he needed to turn the bag back into the deputies at the park? That would explain why Johnny didn't have a call log on his phone and why he would say he deleted it. It would also explain why the name of the store that Johnny was supposed to have gone to has changed so many times. And maybe Charles isn't really clairvoyant, but instead asked Johnny if anyone had seen him in the lake, and he mentioned the kayaker to Charles. Now, this is just a hypothetical that popped into my head when I started looking into the stores and wondering why I kept remembering McClellan's as the original store Johnny had gone to. And I think maybe my hypothetical scenario makes more sense than some of Johnny's stories. In any case, Johnny returned to the park. And here is what Johnny told Daniel the PI when he got back to the park. Quote, "Pulled up in the parking lot where the picnic tables are at, and there was a truck there. I pulled in behind it, not realizing it was the law. I rushed up behind him. He said, 'Sir, would you mind backing up? I gotta run this drone.' I looked at the drone. I said, 'Oh, Lord, that's a sheriff's drone.' That's when I realized he was the law. I didn't realize he was the law because he was in his personal truck. He was a 24-hour law. He was on call. I pulled up behind him and said, 'Sir, do you know a Mica Miller?' He said, 'How do you know a Mica? Step out of your truck.' I said, 'Hold on, sir. I don't know what's going on anyway.' I told him what I just told you, my story. He sort of came around and told me what was going on, and I said, 'Man, don't tell me that.' And he said, 'Yeah, that's what happened.' And I said, 'Well, how do y'all know? How'd y'all find out?' He told me she called 911 and that she was going to commit suicide." Did the deputy go ahead and deploy the drone at this time before talking to Johnny, or was the deployment delayed? Johnny said in the interview with the PI that the deputy talked to him for about 30 minutes. If we look at the report that Robeson County published, there's a bit of discrepancy between theirs and Johnny's timeline. Surprising, isn't it? According to Robeson County, the drone was deployed at 3:45. Then the report states that they were approached by Johnny while they were conducting the search with the drone. Maybe it was just easier to write it that way, and he actually had approached them just before they launched the drone. But if that's the case, how did Johnny get to a store and back so fast? According to Robeson County, the first deputies didn't arrive at the park until 3:31, and Johnny said at least one deputy was there when he left to go to the store. Even if Johnny was leaving at the exact time the first deputy got there, he only had 14 minutes to get to the store, buy a lighter, and get back to the park, which seems to be cutting it close even if the store was 10 minutes away and he sped there and back. But there's another problem with that scenario, because of course there is. The report states the drone was dispatched to the park at 3:33 and that detectives didn't arrive with it to the park until 3:50. So how was the drone deployed at 3:45 if it didn't get to the park until 3:50? Something is off with all of the accounts of this particular event. None of these timelines work. Which store did Johnny actually go to if he actually went to a store? And when he got back to the park, was he in his truck or in his Challenger? Daniel, the PI, talked to one of the maintenance workers at the park, and he said Johnny came back that day in his Challenger. But Johnny said the maintenance worker was a big fat liar and that he'd gone to the river the next day in his Challenger. And what about the phone pings? There was a phone ping while Mica was still on the phone with the dispatcher. Now, the dispatcher had a little trouble getting her direct location at first, but then realized Mica was at Lumber River State Park. Then there was a request for a phone ping at 3:20 and another at 3:42 through Verizon. Robeson County uses Rapid SOS, which can pinpoint a caller's location within a 3-meter radius. Even more interesting is that it can pinpoint a caller's location for up to 15 minutes after the call has ended. The map of the phone pings shows that the phone pinged way back in the slough, and that matches the coordinates given. So what is the 1281 Princess Anne address that shows on the report? That could be the cell tower of Verizon. But what was the location of the first ping while Mica was supposedly on the phone with the dispatcher? If it was the ping that shows on the map, how would she have had service to make a call? And how would there have not been any background noise? And if it was the 320 ping, where had it pinged before that? And if it was the 342 ping, then there's no way Johnny had picked up her belongings before then. Plus, why did the phone ping way in the back of the slough, but according to Johnny's report, it was found with the rest of her stuff that was closer to the lake? Were there two phones? According to every map I've seen that shows what was found where that day, the phone ping was the farthest from the lake, then the gun, then Mica, and then her belongings were the closest to the lake. The more I look at it, the less it makes sense. And if Johnnie talked to the deputies before Mica was found, then why didn't the detectives go to that area, block it off, and investigate? You'd think with the phone pinging in that area and Johnnie telling him he found her belongings in that area, they'd rush over there to investigate, but they didn't. Instead, we have the kayaker who called 911 at 4:23 and tells them he's found Mica. Oddly, though, even though there isn't supposed to be phone service there, he has it. In fact, his call was breaking up at first, and then he did something magical to make the 911 phone call clear up. What did he do? The dispatcher informed the officers who were at the park of the locations of Mica's body, and they finally decided to go and secure the area. After Johnnie talked to the detectives, he left the park, and at some later time he spoke with the great white kayaker. The kayaker told Johnnie that he must have gone right past Mica's body, but according to the map Johnnie agreed was correct, in his interview with Natasha, Mica's belongings were closer to the lake. So how would Johnnie have passed her, and how would the kayaker have known where Johnnie went in the slough unless he was with him? And in the interview with Natasha, Johnnie said that where he found her belongings, the slough was more open and wasn't full of debris and as narrow as it was where Mica's body was found. Another point that came up in this is that somehow there was mention of shell casings being found under Mica's bag. But Johnnie says there weren't any there when he picked up her bag. Supposedly, detectives were the ones who said that that's where the shell casings were. Were they talking about the same bag? Maybe Mica actually did have a smaller fanny pack type bag in her backpack, and that's what Johnnie found. That would also explain why he never saw a lock on it. Maybe her backpack was found somewhere else. I'm not sure I've accomplished anything with this video other than to end up with more questions than when I started. If the deputy that spoke to Johnnie actually did tell him that Mica had committed suicide, then it sounds like they'd already made up their minds. The woman who was fishing with her son wrote that the detectives didn't talk to anyone that was fishing. She thought that they only talked to the large white man in the yellow kayak. As far as I know, Johnnie Jacobs has not been arrested and is not a person of interest in the case of Mica Miller or any other case. He is innocent until proven guilty. But man, oh man, has he tried my patience. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.